We are in the middle of a legislative session. They meet every other year in regular session, and right now this is the time when bills are being filed, debated, lots of long debates. I think you all had a long debate last night, amended, voted on, signed into law, so that they have taken their time to come up in the middle of a very hectic schedule is a really tribute to how strongly they feel about helping mentor the next generation of women leaders in Arkansas. I'm going to do a quick introduction to my far right. I'd like to introduce Representative Vivian Flowers from Pine Bluff. Representative Flowers is the immediate past chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. She serves on a lot of committees in the House of Representatives, which means she has to probably do a lot of homework studying about all these different subjects. And a few of those committees are the Legislative Joint Audit, Joint Committee for Advanced Communications and Information Technology, House Public Transportation, and the House Agri-Forestry and Economic Development Committee. And to my closer right is Representative Carol Dalby from Texarkana. She is the first woman ever in Arkansas to serve as chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Representative Dalby served in a number of elected positions before she came to the Arkansas legislature. She also serves on a couple of other committees in the House. She's on the City, County, and Local Affairs and the House Rules Committee. But they both take time to be involved in Our Girls Lead. That was created in the last session of the General Assembly in 2017, and they work with other female legislators to share their experiences and stories to inspire the next generation. So before we get into the Q&A, we're going to see a short video.
Representative Dalby, you're recognized. Present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1940 is really a bill that will clarify.
Mr. Speaker and colleagues, House Bill 1649.
Thank you, colleagues. This bill is near and dear. I love competition.
Legislation contains several amendments to the education background check legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is one of the Treasurer's office.
I knew nothing about politics whatsoever, nothing. Do you know I had to Google where the Capitol was? I didn't even know where the Capitol was at. And I kind of felt like that child in the classroom who wasn't the smartest kid in class. And I was like, I'm going to be in a room full of people who know this, who live this, and I was terrified of that whole sensation. I have not yet felt stupid here.
If I could go back and tell young Sonia Barker one thing, well, I could write a book. Overarching, it would probably be, don't be so shy. Be brave, be courageous, be who you are, regardless of what society expects.
I keep going back to that little girl. I was never the pretty one, or I was never the skinny one. I was always studying because I thought that was a way that I could advance things. I worked harder than anybody else shooting free throws a couple of summers so that I could play basketball because I wasn't the best athlete. But working at something and getting through the mistakes and the tough times helps prepare you to be able to answer those tough times later on.
When I was a young girl and, grew up the only, and I hate, always being the black girl. Now, I love being black and I love being a girl, I love being a woman, but when you are the only one, it's an automatic feeling of isolation sometimes. And it wasn't until I got older that I felt confident in my skin and comfortable being in any room and felt like I could do whatever anybody else could do.
Don't be afraid to speak your mind. Don't be afraid that if you have an idea, if someone else tells you that don't do it, don't be afraid. Say it. Do it, act upon it.
From little sisters to big sisters, I think that we have an obligation to help others and engage with them and let them know that there are situations that they're going to be able to overcome and be positive role models.
Hello, my name is Erica Cunley, and I attend Little Rock Central High School. And I would just like to ask, what is the most significant barrier with being a female leader? And also, what inspires you?
Yes, probably the most significant barrier is myself. You know, I think that every person, no matter your gender, your whatever, you could find some things to feel insecure about, or to feel like you're different, marginalized in some kind of way. And I'm not saying that those margins are not out there and those challenges are not out there. But I would say that when in my mind those things don't matter, even if they matter to somebody else, someone trying to put up a barrier or someone feeling the same way I do. Once I decide in my mind that doesn't matter and I'm gonna move forward, I'm gonna say what I need to say, I'm gonna file what I need to file, I'm going to, represent in the way that I think that the people who represent, elected me, need me or want me to represent. Once I decide it doesn't matter, it just doesn't matter. That's not my problem, it's somebody else's. And so only when I give in to those things, whatever the isms are, or whatever the, strengths or deficiencies or perceptions are, when I make a decision that I can't allow that to keep me from doing my job, then it's no longer a problem. But when I give into it, that's a problem, and that's my problem.
I got so interested in listening to her, I'm not sure I remember the exact question.
Biggest barrier.
Oh, the biggest barrier. Well, I think it's always ourselves. It's easy sometimes to think, that's hard, I can't do that, until you take that first step. Once you take that first step, it becomes a lot easier. So I think overall, it's usually myself that is my biggest barrier.
Okay, and I just have one more question.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
You're granted to answer your follow-up.
I would like to also know, what are some big obstacles that y'all had to face while, running in office?
Oh, well, let's see. I ran for school board. I was on the school board. I never had an opponent. When I ran for school board, I think I garnered all of 5 votes, and that was my husband, me, and 3 of my neighbors, because I was unopposed, so no one showed up to go vote. So I was never opposed there, but I had a primary opponent. And it was not so much an obstacle for me as it was an obstacle for my husband. He would get so irate over the things that were said, that my opponent might say about me, or the literature they might put out, or something like that, and he would say, "Oh, you got to go say something. You got to, And it was harder on my family. It was harder on my husband and our 2 children than it was, I think, on me. And so sometimes your family can be an obstacle because you're trying to shield them from any bad publicity. And shield them just from the sheer rigors. I don't know if you had an opponent or not, but the sheer rigors of having an opponent and the toll that it takes on your family, it's not necessarily an obstacle, but I think as a woman and as a caregiver, that was always in the back of my mind. And the next time when I ran, I didn't draw an opponent, and I called my husband from the rotunda, because we're all watching that last little bit to see if he'd draw an opponent. And, and he was like, "Oh, thank God," and both of my children who are in college were just like, "Oh, we are so glad, Mom, this is so hard on us." So, I think sometimes as a woman, our obstacles are not family. They weren't an obstacle, but they were always in mind. You always would think in terms of, don't want to hurt them, don't want them to catch the bad publicity, you know. And anytime anybody takes after, and probably you see that too, somebody says something negative, it's always your family that's ready to go fight, you know.
Yeah, my mother. My father is like, you know, my mother is that person for me, and she just always said, Levita, that's my middle name, Levita, and whatever she tells me to do, I just don't want people talking about you. I'm like, Mama, too late, okay? So, for me, that's not the biggest obstacle, because she's that way about everything, because she's a mother bear, you know. I mean, that's just how she is about her children. But for me, the biggest obstacle is, I won't even talk about, say, the communication. It's are people who don't recognize their power and who don't believe in our election system. That's because sometimes I can spend time and make my points and really encourage them to vote, to get involved, to say why this matters. But a lot of times for the people who are like dead set, you know, I'm not doing that. My vote doesn't matter. What about this? What about the Electoral College? And, you know, that to me is most frustrating. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Robin Collins. I'm a senior at Washington Chapel High School. My question for you is, what is the best advice you have for people who are scared to accomplish things they want to accomplish because they're a woman or because of their color?
I'm gonna say, you know, don't be scared. I'm gonna, and to add to that, that it's natural, that, so specific to being a woman and or being an African American woman, there are a lot of things to fear, and it's natural for you to fear those things. Know that people who are not women, so men, and people who are not African American also have fears. And when you remember that and do it anyway, so that's the mark of courage and that's the mark of faith, right? It's that when you're, because everybody is. If you go into a room have you taken your SAT or your ACT here? Yeah. When you went in the room, weren't you scared? But you still went in anyway, right? Because you had to. And I guarantee you, everybody in that room was scared. Now, you may have looked at different ones and they acted like they weren't. Even the ones who do well on standardized tests, they're scared too, because they're like, you know what? I normally do well, but I have to do great because I got to get into Yale. Like, everybody has their level and reasons to fear. But the advice is don't be scared. So let me go back. Don't let it stop you. Just be as prepared as you can, ask people for help, and dive in anyway.
I guarantee you that every person's ever walked through the doors of the House of Representatives the first time after being elected probably looked around, because if you've never been there, it's a grand room, beautiful stained glass. I mean, it is very awe-inspiring, and I guarantee the men may not own up to it, but I guarantee you they probably wondered, what have I gotten myself into and can I do it? Every single one of them. I know I did. I bet you did. You know, even if you'd been there 1,000 times, even if you'd paged or you'd worked at the Capitol or whatever, suddenly you walk in and you think, oh my, where are the bathrooms? You know? You got to learn where everything is, and so everybody's new, and sometimes women will take that on and really, really worry about it, and the men will be blustery about it, but they're just as scared because they don't know where anything is either. So, you know, you just have to take that first step. I've always found that there are times, and I practice law, there'd be times on a weekend I just worry about a case that I was going to have to try, but the minute I stood up and said I was ready, you know, I could go do it. You always have to take that first step and be ready and go.
My name is Michaela Brown. I'm a senior at Hot Springs High School. And my question for both of you is, were there any actions that you took in high school that helped lead you to where you are today? And maybe if not in high school, in college, or just in your earlier years? That's my question.
Well, in high school, I studied. I mean, I did my best. I always tried to, my parents never pushed me, but it was always, they expected you to always do your best. And so I think that's the key thing. Whether it was in the classroom, I was in the band, whether it was, doing your best in band or whatever it was that you were active in at that time, it was always in my family, you were expected to give it 100%. And I think that is what's prepared me, and I tried to do the same thing in college. I was on student government in college, did that. When I went to law school, I also got involved in the Student Bar Association, and not necessarily because I had an eye toward politics, but it was a way to get to meet people. And it was a way to get to meet people that maybe weren't in my class that I had a chance to learn, because I'm basically a shy person. I'm a quiet person. And so it forced me to get out and to meet people. And it made my school experience a richer and better experience. And so I think, those were the things that I did when I was younger, was to get out and make myself meet people and make myself get involved.
I'm a pretty extroverted person, and let me say this too. A lot of people think being extroverted means that you're talkative and you're, and I am. But what I learned from a friend of mine who is also talkative, but he's an introvert, and for years he would say he's an introvert, and I would be like, you're not. He actually had to buy me a book, and in reading that book, I learned the basic thing I would say about that is an introvert is sapped. Their energy is sapped by people. Like, they have to recharge. It's not easy being social, and it's not easy pouring yourself, right? And an extrovert feeds off of it. And so I do feed off of people. Like, I like to talk. So to that I would say, I just have always gotten involved. And the more I meet people and talk to people and they talk to me, like, I'm pretty good at even getting an introvert to engage and get on my plane, my energy plane. And that has always been beneficial for me. So whether I have been successful or not, I've made friends along the way. I've learned things along the way. And that has always proven beneficial for me, being better, growing in something, not being afraid, because that's the other thing. When you're going to have this natural anxiety when you're around new people, or when you're doing new things, when you're testing, when you're reading something or learning about something new. But the more you meet people and talk to people, if you're not afraid to say, do you understand this? Like, I have no problem asking a question. And sometimes it's not good because you don't always want people to know that you don't know something. But at the same time, it's like, how do I learn? How do I know where to go? How do I find out where the bathroom is if I don't say? Because you know how guys don't like to ask directions? I don't mind asking directions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Gia Turner. I'm a senior at Washington Chapel. And my question is, when you were younger, did you think that you would be where you are right now? If not, where did you think you would be, or where did you want to be?
Oh, wow. I've kind of wanted to do so many things when I was younger. And I still, in that way, sort of a Jill of all trades and a master of none. I wanted to do hair. I used to cut people's hair in the neighborhood and braid people's hair. I wanted to be an obstetrician gynecologist. I wanted to, and then I wanted to be in politics also. I think even through, when I went to college first, I was a business major. I wanted to be a lawyer. different turns in your life when you meet people and you do things kind of helps guide where you go. And it does change. I mean, in my career in politics, I've worked on campaigns, I've worked in policy because of different boards I've served on. I've gotten into in the public health arena. I've done some professional writing. And so I just would say that, you know, being somebody who likes to get involved and likes to learn about things and do different things, I just have been wide open. You know, I worked at UAMS for 10 years in the Center for Diversity Affairs, and the focus of our work was really to engage students in high school and colleges to help cultivate interest in health professions. And, you know, every time we go to high school, kids would come to the table, I want to be a doctor, or either a nurse. They didn't know about a lot of the other career paths, and once they found out, you know, it'd be like, oh, well, I think I like this too. And so, you know, for me, I wanted to do and be a lot of things, and it's still not over. I'm still thinking about doing a couple. I'm going to start a business after the session, and I'm still thinking honestly about law school. My best friend told me this morning, you need to go to law school. A few years ago, she told me I didn't need to do that, but timing and different things come into play, and the people you trust and love see what your talents are. You know them yourself, and you just have to decide, is the time right? What are my resources? And you just got to get prepared and do it.
I agree a lot with what she just said. Just be open. I've done a lot of different things, and even now I may change and go to do something else. I majored in English in college and taught school for a couple of years, and then went into the administration. But it didn't take me long, and this may age me quickly. When I got out of school and took my first teaching job, I got paid a whopping $9,100 a year. That was it. I didn't make enough money to rent my own apartment, so I lived with my parents. And I had been accepted to law school, but I was tired of school at that point. So it took me 4 years, and I lived with my parents, and I saved up money and all those kinds of good things. And then one day I said, what am I waiting for? And I quit the school district. At that point, I was their personnel director and public relations person. Who knew? From an English teacher to that. But I went to the University of Arkansas to law school. And so I, dropped out and I did that. Well, then I went into private practice. I was in a law firm. John Stroud, former chief of the Court of Appeals, was one of the law partners. Worked there, had a great time. But I got married, and we had our first child, who is now getting ready to graduate from law school. And his whole first year of life, I pretty much missed it, because I would drop him off, work all day, my husband would pick him up, he'd be asleep by the time I got home. And when Robert was about a year old, one of my friends over on the Texas side had been elected district attorney, and he said, why don't you come over here if you need to take off early, and I only worked about 3 days a week at that point because I wanted to spend time with him. And so I have been over on the Texas side of Texarkana in the district attorney's office and honed my practice I have a very specialty practice of Texas government work. Who knew? And it's the wide range of all different things. But I did that so that I would have time with my children. My children got out, they're in college. One's going to graduate in undergraduate school in May, the other one's going to graduate from law school in May. And it was a good time for me to run for office. And so I did. And so, just like Representative Flowers said, circumstances and people come in and out of your life, and I think you have to be willing to seize those opportunities and change. I've had some great opportunities. I served 10 years on the Arkansas Supreme Court as the special justice on the Lakeview school funding case. Did you not know that? For 10 years, I came to Little Rock and served on that case. I've been a district judge in Texarkana, Arkansas. And so, when things would present themselves, I would try to seize that. But for me, it was vastly important, and maybe the difference in my age from Representative Flowers, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but you could, whatever you can guess. And, but to me, it was vastly important that I raised my family, but I wanted to have a career. And so I figured out a way to kind of do both of those things. So always be open to whatever comes along. People and circumstances change.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Naja Johnson. I'm currently a senior at Washington Chapel. My question is, if you had to start over from scratch, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently and why?
What would I do? I'm not sure I'd do anything differently. I guess you can always second guess yourself. I might have had more fun, might not have taken myself so seriously at times, but I'm not sure that I would have changed the direction or the path of my life. And now my husband and I, we were just in Fayetteville last weekend seeing our children, and we both said, gosh, it would have been wonderful to have maybe lived in Northwest Arkansas with all the things going on. But circumstances didn't allow that. His father had died and his mother was there, and he felt the need that he needed to be close to her. My parents were older, and I felt the need that I needed to be there to help them. And so we looked back and we had that conversation last week, and we said, well, but we did the things that we needed to do for us. And so I'm not sure I'd change anything other than maybe be a little more flexible and not so serious, because I tend to be a pretty serious kind of person.
I would have been smarter with money and invested more while I was younger. And I would have started, and so this is important, young ladies. I would have started working out regularly and stayed consistent in that. Not just to look good, but for health reasons. And you don't start thinking about that until you're in your 40s and you're like, what's going on with my eyesight? What's going on? Why are my knees not working the way they used to? Yeah. So those two things majorly, I would be more thoughtful about, because I think all the way through my 20s and even into my 30s, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat right. Just those things that are so important to me now, so that I can feel good and so that I can have the kind of longevity I want to have. You burn the candle at both ends when you're young because you can, and you don't feel anything. You don't look different. No, bags don't happen. Skin blemishes don't happen. Your knees work. You just sit Indian style and you just marvel at how flexible you are and nothing happens. And now it's like, ow, wait. So those in those two areas, I would definitely do things differently. Everything else, I'm good.
Life goes fast. You turn around and what happened to the 10 years or that 20 years or that 30 years? I mean, it goes by in a blink.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jaden Barron. I am an 8th grader at Mapleville Middle School. And my question for you is, have you ever been discriminated by men?
Yes.
And yes. I think it happens all the time, and not because, I think discrimination works like this. You have some really bad actors who set out to discriminate for their own end or because of their feelings, negative feelings or whatever. And usually those people are not so obvious. Usually you don't even know what's happening. But the ones, that do things where they make a difference and you're just kind of like, did he just say that? They don't even know. A lot of times when you say something, they'll either get defensive and no, that's not what I meant, or either it'll be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. And I think that's how things work with all of the sort of isms, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's ageism, whatever. I think a lot of people sort of live in their own bubble and they just don't know. And then when they do see it, you're kind of like, oh, I'm not going to say anything. You know, you don't feel good about it, but you don't want to make yourself a target. So absolutely, yes, still happens, and you just got to, you know, figure out how to wade through it and educate where you can, get done what you want to get done. Sometimes with that, it happens so much, you don't have time to deal with it. It's not your issue. That's how I kind of deal with it.
And I want to give a shout out to the Speaker of the House. Speaker Shepherd had a unique position this time around because we had changed our rules in the 91st Assembly on how committees were chosen and leadership and those kinds of things. And Speaker Shepherd has a son and 2 daughters, and maybe the fact that he's the dad of 2 girls, but he took a real, I think, a bold step in his appointments. He appointed me as chair of Judiciary. First time a woman had ever been chair of House Judiciary. But he went one other step further. There's a woman that's a vice chair of Judiciary. Now that turned some heads. And the news people, the TV people, stopped me that day. We didn't know we were going to be named chairs. Had no idea until it was announced from the podium on our first day. Well, not only did the Speaker do that, the Speaker appointed 2 women, a chair and a vice chair in Aging, Children, Youth, and Military Affairs. Yep. That's the first time that had ever happened. The Speaker then appointed a woman and a vice chairwoman for House Rules. Now, House Rules may not sound like anything very exciting, but it is the committee in which all tobacco, alcohol, it's the sin committee. Alcohol, tobacco, casinos, any sin you can think of comes through House Rules. We have 2 women chairing that. And there are a number of other committees in which the Speaker appointed women as vice chairs. And I think he made a real effort to put women in leadership positions. And I appreciate that on the Speaker's part of recognizing that it was time to bring women into leadership roles. I know that gets off topic from have you ever been discriminated against, but yes, we have, but we keep going.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jada Blunt and I go to Central High, and I just wanted to know what were some of your goals?
Goals.
To live forever. Legislative goals or personal goals?
It can be personal.
Well, as far as legislative or chairmanship goals, it's always my goal when whoever is in presenting their bill, and Representative Flowers can speak to this because she was in my committee presenting a bill for 2 hours yesterday. It is always my goal that whoever comes before my committee, that they are heard in a fair and a partial way by the chair. That is always a goal, to treat people who come into the committee. On a personal level, I guess it's kind of intertwined with what I'm doing now as a legislator, is to represent my district to the best that I can. I'm a Republican. Representative Flowers is a Democrat. I do not always vote a straight Republican vote because that's not my district. And it's always my goal to try to be thoughtful in the bills that are coming on the floor, to vote the way that I think the people in my district would want me to vote. And I think Representative Flowers does the same thing for her district. The demographics of our district are different, but in a lot of ways they're very much similar because we're both South Arkansas representatives, which is a lot different from other parts of the state. So I think, you know, legislatively, professionally, those are always to be honest and open and listening. And I think that bleeds over into my personal life at this point. In my personal life is to get those 2 kids out of college so I have 2 pennies to rub together. So.
I would say a professional goal would be to work as hard as I can through all of my opportunities as a leader to try to encourage more young people to get involved in the process. So whether that's through mentoring, internships, shadowing, but also efforts to register young people to vote. And I'm not just somebody who's like, register to vote so you can vote for me or vote for my party. And I mean, I want that too. But I'm really clear that, and I didn't say this earlier, I really was so moved when I was a kid by a teacher. Everybody has a teacher that they remember. And I had this teacher named I had a lot of them, but I had this teacher named Mr. Justice in 8th grade history. And the class was so awesome because it started always on the first day with him basically saying, you're here to learn, I'm here to teach, but I'm not here to help you learn how to memorize. He's like, I want to teach you history and I do things a little differently. He set us up with contracts. So for the whole semester's work, homework, reading assignments, quizzes, tests, he laid all of it out. And for all the papers and the homework, I could do that in the first 2 weeks of the semester. I could crank that out if I wanted to, if I could. And I would be done for the semester. And I could just come in class and watch the films and listen to the lectures. And that was sort of my first college-like experience in learning, and I loved it. And then plus he was so funny, and to me, I would be the only one laughing at his jokes because he was very sarcastic, and he used to do this laugh.
You laughed at my joke yesterday.
Yeah, I have one of those senses of humor, right? Well, and then he showed us all films that really got me involved and made me think, right? So some of the films would be about conspiracy theories, right, that I still believe today. But it still made me think, it made me question, and then I later had a professor named Peggy Scranton, who was a Republican, by the way. She's awesome. She had energy, it made me an introvert. It made me tired. Her energy was so big. But she would spend the whole class showing us how to challenge what was in the book, showing us where there were inconsistencies in what was being said and making me think, oh, wait, I'm outthinking the person who wrote the book? Okay, I'm smart. But it's those kind of things that make me know that this voting thing, elections, government, super important. If it wasn't, people wouldn't be spending millions, and in some cases over time, billions of dollars to influence. People who didn't want black people to vote, or before the 20s, women to vote, wouldn't have spent so much time, people dying for it. It's that important, and if I could sit each one of you down in just a conversation to show you how the decisions we make affect your everyday lives more than anybody, more than me, the decisions we make are going to affect your life now and moving forward. So that's my goal, is to encourage and be a part of as many young people, because y'all don't have the right to vote now, but from 18 to I want to say 30, that group of folks vote the least, but have the largest voting bloc in the country. So imagine what you could do to influence policy. We saw what happened with the school shooting in Florida and what those kids were able to do in making grown people listen to them, even be mad at them. When you're making somebody mad, you're doing something. Personally, so again, with the conspiracy, I saw this video, this documentary called What the Health about 2 years ago. And I have not eaten meat since. But aside from that, I just want to eat better, I want to live better, I want to be more healthy, so I'm focused on one day soon getting to becoming a vegan, which I can't do now. I still do seafood, and I can't give up eggs right now, so that's where I am.
So what was the reaction of your friends and family when you first decided you were going to run? Like your first time ever, like, okay, I finally got to do something. What was the reaction of your friends, your family, your community, the first time ever?
Really good question. So I had been involved in serving on, political campaign committees and been involved in different civic, activities. So nobody was shocked. And then, I had made it known that I had planned to run at some point. Because I had worked for the legislature, I had relationships with different legislators, including my pastor and mentor. And when I worked for the Legislative Black Caucus, he was also my boss. And so I feel comfortable telling the story because we're okay now. Right. But when we got to a point where he was going to give up his seat to run, then there was some question as to whether or not his son would run. And so then, and that happened a couple of cycles. He decided to stay in one, and then when he was term limited, his son announced, who I thought wasn't interested, but he was, and that's fine, and I'm clear, and I really feel strongly, nobody owns these seats. I don't care how long you serve, it's the people's seat, and the people vote to put in who they want. But I knew I was gonna run. And so when I ran and the incumbent's son had put his hat in the ring, everyone who said, nobody wanted to get in the middle of that, right? And Pine Bluff is still pretty small. Every town is small. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles. Every place is small in politics. So people sort of didn't want to get in the middle and say who they supported, or some people would say, I support you, but I knew that they had told the other person that they, so that's where it can get really hairy. And I think that because both of us are young, it like people didn't know what to do. My family, they were gung-ho, always supportive, but a couple of family members were afraid of what, their perception of politics meant, that politics is dirty, So I think that there was a fear of what would happen to me, and that manifested in a couple of family members saying, well, why do you have to do this now? Well, why don't you run, why don't you move in your parents and run from another district? I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And no, so those are the kinds of things that come, I think, when your family wants to protect you and people have a perception or a sense that politics is one thing or that you'll be hurt. But, in the last panel discussion, there was a question about fear, and fear is natural. In everything, and everybody experiences it. I don't care what they look like and how confident they look, what you think they have. Everybody comes to a new situation or a challenging situation with fear. And the question is, are you gonna have faith, and are you gonna have enough courage to do it anyway? So.
In my situation, my husband's father had been the county judge in Bowie County, Texas, which is the sister county to Miller County, Arkansas, even though we live on the Arkansas side. His father had been the elected county judge over there for ever and ever, and his grandfather had been the state representative in the eastern section of Texas. And so my husband was well aware of what political campaigns meant, and he was not terribly excited. He said, go ahead. I mean, he's always been very supportive. He just didn't want to be the one out front. Their paycheck was from whether or not his dad got reelected. And so he did not, he wasn't terribly excited about another campaign, but he became my sign guy. He put out all the big signs, hit himself in the head with the T-post driver, had to have stitches across his forehead, but so, I mean, he's always been very supportive in whatever I've done. He is one of these guys, though, that you go do it, let me stand behind you, and I'll just watch from the sidelines. So he was fine with it. Our kids, we have a daughter now who is a senior at the University of Arkansas, and our son is now in his last semester of law school at the University of Arkansas. And they were like, okay, Mom, if that's what you want to do. And they did help put out signs. It was much harder on my family, I think, as far as worrying about what was being said and what was going on. My friends all went, why do you want to go to Little Rock? You know, because if you live, Representative Flowers commutes basically back and forth from Pine Bluff each day. I have to live here. I can't commute back and forth each day. And so that means on Sunday evening, I leave my house in Texarkana, come to Little Rock, live in Little Rock, and then when we're out in session, we all race to our apartment and throw our clothes and our bags in, and here we go. And we go home to wash our clothes, and we're home. I'll be home tonight and Saturday and come back on Sunday. So, you know, my friends, and they all got out, and they all stood at polls, and they all worked for me, and they all did that, but they all told me, you have got to be crazy. I do not want to live that nomad life. So,
I'm from Little Rock, and I was wondering, like, what age or grade did you, like, realize this is what you wanted to do? Like, you have to, like, what made you focus on this one thing?
I don't know that there was an age or grade. I think that always through junior high and high school and college and law school, I always tried to take a leadership position or try to get involved in organizations so I get to know people and those kinds of things. And as we discussed with the last group, circumstances, people come in and out of your life, and circumstances change, and we both have done a lot of different things before we got to this position. I think it has always been, I've always been interested in politics and government because I happen to believe that we have absolutely the best system in the world, but we have to guard that system, we have to protect that system, we have to be involved in that system, or it goes away. We have to get out there and vote. We have to get out there and support people that we want to be in there. So I've always kind of had it in the back of my mind. It just so happened that the time was right for me. The time would not have been right for me 20 years ago, but the time was right for me 4 years ago.
So that's a really good question, and it's interesting having a second time to answer some of the same questions. Yeah. So my first sort of interest in this arena was probably peaked when I was in 8th grade because I had a really great teacher. And I won't tell the whole story, but the way that he taught history and the way that some of the things that I was able to see about history and how instrumental, you know, Congress was or the Supreme Court was at making decisions that had such an incredible impact on African Americans during at the end of the Civil War, or during the Civil Rights Movement, or during sort of in between then, where you saw lynchings of men, women, and children. There was always this point where people came together and said, that's wrong, and we're going to do something about it. And eventually, policy said, you know what, we're going to change our whole way of doing things, and if someone does, like, something became a crime that before was accepted, you know, and I just saw all of that coming from this political policy arena, and I just wanted to be a part of it because, you know, I saw that things could change greatly as a result of it. And I would add that always mushroomed into and was into different activities, different exposure. But I'll say this: I know I'm different, and that was sort of my basketball. So everybody has an interest, and then it becomes personal, right? So whether it's science or sports or whatever, you sort of learn about it and go, oh, I wonder if I can do that. And then you decide you're good at it, and then you learn everything about it to a point that you talk about it or you watch stuff, you want to go see movies about it, and people are like, oh, like, no, I don't want to watch basketball games, or I don't want to hear about your science or engineering. But this was my basketball, and when I think back on being a kid, I would watch this show, and this is way predates you guys. This is like when TV used to go off at 11 o'clock at night, okay? That's how old I am. And there was this show that when I'd come home from school called Fight Back. And this guy, his name was David Horowitz, would do a show where he would try out products to show whether or not, companies would be lying about what those products would do. Or I remember, so I would come home and watch that show where other kids would go home and watch cartoons. Or I remember reading and hearing on the news about this guy named Ralph Nader, and it excited me that this one guy would be fighting for the people so that cars at the time, Pintos, anybody remember Pintos? Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm talking to the teachers, okay? I know y'all don't know anything about Pintos. But there was this really ugly car called a Pinto, and it was like a small square station wagon, if you can imagine. You guys don't even know what station wagons are. So this Pinto car, though, turned out to be super dangerous, where if you're in an accident and it hit the car in a certain place, the car would explode because of how the gas tank was situated. And so when you started talking about punitive damages, so you hear now this case of that then, you guys might be too young to know about the McDonald's coffee case. Anybody know about that too? No? God, how old are y'all? 10, 5? So you remember about that. So now, fast forward many years, everybody's like, oh, punitive damages are so horrible. But that's where it came from, was how do you get corporations to feel the punishment of advancing something and putting it out to the public that could help them, knowing that it could hurt the public, right? Because a fine of $1 million to a multi-million-dollar corporation means nothing. So how do we create some damages so that it'll make them say, we better not put this out to the public anymore, because if we do, somebody could find out and we're gonna have to pay a whole bunch of money. That excited me. So over the years, different things kept me interested. One thing led to another. Different jobs, right? Different ways to serve, different campaign committees, and here we are. And I say all that to say this. No matter what your interest level is in anything, it may seem like real far away and something that's not for you. The best advice that I ever gave students when I worked for UAMS and we were recruiting students for health careers is, you might think, oh my God, I'm not good at taking standardized tests. I would just tell them, well, get good, right? Because you could look at somebody like a basketball player like Shaquille O'Neal, who was supposed to be, and was one of the best, but he was a horrible free throw player, right? And people started making fun of him, and what did he do? Practice. He went home and said, you know what, for me to be the best, I have to go home and I have to keep practicing free throws. And he got good enough where people stopped making fun of him, and then he could do the other stuff really well. And so I just want to encourage you guys, don't be limited by what people say you should be. There have always been women who are nurses and teachers. And nurses and teachers are awesome. And I thank God that women were nurses and teachers, because if you're sick, you need a really good nurse. And if you want to learn anything in the world, whether you're a rocket scientist or you're a business owner or whatever, you need a really good teacher. So I thank God that most of those teachers were women. But we can do other things too, and we shouldn't be limited and stifled because somebody says you can't be good in science because you're a girl. That's not true.
Okay, so I'm from El Dorado High School, and
Where?
El Dorado.
Okay. El Dorado.
I have a question. So regardless of, y'all said y'all wanted it very bad, and y'all knew this is what y'all wanted to do, but were there any setbacks or times where you felt like maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe this isn't for me, but it helped you grow into a stronger person?
I think in any occupation or anything you do in life, there will come those times that there will be setbacks. And I think there will come those times that you think, am I capable, or did I do that, or can I do that? And I think what you have to do is you just have to power through those. I told the last group that if you've ever been to the Capitol and you've been to the House of Representatives, it's a big room, and it's a grand room, and it has beautiful stained glass, and it's very awe-inspiring. And and it didn't matter how many times I've been to the Capitol, how many times I've seen the House of Representatives. The first time I walked in those big doors, and the, what's he called? Not our doorman, but what's Stephen's name? You know,
Sergeant.
Yeah.
The Sergeant at Arms?
Yes, the Sergeant at Arms. Thank you. I couldn't think. But the Sergeant at Arms who stands there and opens the door for you to go in, and you walk in, and my first thought was, what have I got myself into? I don't know any of these people. I don't know what to do. Wasn't quite sure where the bathrooms were. I mean, you know, it was a whole new experience, even though I had had lots of really great experiences in life. It was a new thing, and so you just have to learn. You take that step and you go in, and I would look around and I'd think, hey, wait a minute. I got elected just like that person way over on the other side got elected. And I had every right to be in my seat that all the men around me had. There weren't any women sitting to the left or to the right of me. There were no women in front of me. My first session, there was a woman behind me. But I had every right to sit in that seat as everybody else did. And so, you know, there are always setbacks. There are always things that will creep into your mind, but I think what you have to do is take that step and realize I have every right to be here just like they do, and power through and go on. And it's turned out.
So yes, but to that I would say that anything you do, anywhere you go, I don't care if you stay at home by yourself, you are going to encounter challenges and setbacks. And, you know, one thing about doing different things and going different places, meeting different people, have taught me is that no matter how hard the setback, no matter how hard the challenge, one thing that I have learned and that I will go into my next decade of life with is, number one, to expect them. And number two, no matter how bad it is, it will pass. It's gonna be all right. And so when people tell you that, you know, when you're younger, and I remember being young and my mother saying that, I would tell her, you just supposed to say that, you just don't understand. You know, and she did understand, and she did know a lot of things that I didn't know. And I'll tell you, not being your parent and not being your teacher, and you may never see me in life again, maybe we'll see each other again. Whenever you encounter something that's the worst thing you could ever imagine, just remember that Vivian Flowers said, it's gonna be all right. And because it just will. And when you think about setbacks in career, right? So when you think about someone like Helen Keller, who could not hear, who could not speak, who could not see, and today she's someone we read about who had thoughts and opinions that she was able to communicate in other ways. It kind of makes you ask yourself, what am I tripping about? What's my problem? Whatever your problems are, think about the people who have problems worse than yours, challenges worse than yours. So for girls, women who may encounter gender bias in a job, or a boy who always speaks up and the teacher never picks you because he, you know, for whatever you can think about that feel, or even in the Me Too movement, right? There's a whole generation of women who encountered things and weathered things that we can't even imagine. That when we hear the story, your own grandmother, I promise you, your own great-grandmother, I promise you, could tell you stories that she took to her grave instead that would make you question humanity. just in terms of how other women treated her, how her husband treated her, how people in the community treated her, either because she was a woman, because she was poor, because she was black, because she was white. It's a lot of setbacks that you could encounter. Don't let it stop you. Don't let it paralyze you. You know, you will all go through a scenario where you are in love and you will be hurt. Listen to your CD. This helps you get through it for a few days, but after that, pick up and move on, because there is somebody else out there for you, and God was probably doing you a favor.
Thank you.
Sound like some of you have already been in love.
Is it more African American women in this act?
Sorry, say that again.
Is it more African American women in this act?
Oh, and so it's not an act. It's really sort of a program or a campaign, sort of an awareness campaign. But I'm glad you asked that question, because when I was elected in 2014 to start serving in 2015, I was the only African American woman elected to the House, which was terrible because I knew the history. Before that, I think for 2 terms, there were 0. Now, in Arkansas, African American women comprise about 8% of the population, but there was no one there to express and to share and to contribute the perspectives, the issues, the stories that were relevant when we're making decisions, when we're exploring how some of these issues might affect women of color. Matter of fact, I'm gonna tell you about an issue that's come up right now. So there is a bill right now to sort of deregulate hair braiding. There was already something in 2015, but now this would basically mean that there is no health department oversight for hair braiding. Now, thank God there's no more than one. There's a Jamie, thank you. Jamie Scott, I know Jamie. Jamie Scott is from North Little Rock. She was elected, so now there are 2 of us out of 100. If we weren't there, we wouldn't be able to speak to the sponsor, and I just talked to him yesterday about some issues that come along with hair braiding. That's a safety issue, but you don't think about it because it's not highly professionalized in terms of training and certification, but it's a real issue. So alopecia, traction alopecia is a real issue, and you have different kind of hair braiders, right? And I know everyone who's had their hair braided, African American girls, you've seen the African hair braiders, right? Because a lot of women who are from Nigeria braid a certain way, and it's super, super tight. Well, I have really fine hair, okay? And so if I get my hair, and I've had my hair braided that way, when I took the braids out, it took my hair out right here. And we all know about edges, right? When you have to strengthen and grow your edges out, when you have that kind of traction alopecia, and it's a real thing. And if there's not someone who is monitoring how someone could be hurt because when they go get their hair done, they think that it's gonna be safe and that they won't become bald on the side of their head as a result of that kind of treatment. And so I'm kind of giving you guys an example of why it's important for people who come from different backgrounds to have a voice. But all that to say, now it's 2 of us, and there have been as many, I want to say as 4 or 5, and that happens when folks vote and people support folks who, and really more importantly, when people run. And you saw up there that women tend to think that we're not qualified, that we can't do it. And 25 is a great number, but it's a ridiculous number because women comprise, even though slightly more, the greatest population over men. We're, I think, 51% of the population, and yet there are only 25 out of 135 of us. I think that's about 20%. And across the nation, it's pretty much an average of 20% of people making decisions about what happens with regard to your education, healthcare, the criminal justice laws, taxes. All those things are things that affect girls and women, and when we're not in the room in equal measure, we give up some of our voice and some of our power. So we gotta run, we gotta vote, we gotta be engaged and know that this matters, that elections matter, our votes matter, our voices matter, showing up matters. Thank you for your question.
What obstacles came in your way to success?
That was the first question last time.
Probably the biggest obstacle is myself, ourselves are our biggest obstacles. Thinking, not smart enough, don't have enough money, don't come from the right section of town. I think those are the obstacles. I was really fortunate that I was raised in a family of my mother and dad. I could never remember either one ever saying, you can't do this. You can't do this because you're a girl, or you can't do this for whatever reason. They were always very supportive. So I had a really supportive family in that regard. But I think the biggest obstacle is always myself, always second guessing whether or not I can do it. And I think anytime that you run for an elected office and you go and you pay your money and you sign up, the first thing you start worrying, am I going to get elected? I mean, who wants to lose? I didn't want to lose. Did you want to lose? No? You don't want to lose. And so, but that's always an option when you run. And so you have to kind of get over worrying about, am I going to win or lose? And just get out there and go do it.
Only other thing, I totally agree, and we kind of had the same answer last time. I want to add one thing, though, because one thing about girls, and I remember a little bit about being, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and even into my 20s. There is so much focus for girls on how we look. And the standards are so different, like even in, as a profession, even in school, even in sports. And the crazy thing, I'll just tell you that when I look back on pictures, and this happened the first time when I was in my 20s, and I look back on this picture when I want to say I was 15 years old. And I was always tall. I was, for a long time, the tallest girl in my class, and but always pretty slim. But then I developed early. And then it's mostly girls, I'm sorry guys. And then, you're 12, you get your period, and then I'm embarrassed. And it's something you never wanted to talk about, but your body starts changing, right? And so then I felt fat. And plus I grew up in California, so I'm around and went to school with mostly white girls, and my body was different. And I always felt wrong. I always felt out of place. And I wasn't. And people would tell me oh, you're so beautiful, you're so this. And I was like, you don't know what you talk about. No. You don't believe it, but you are. When people tell you that you are beautiful, it's not just about what the looks are. Because I know a whole bunch of people I can reflect on, and even now as a grown person, who physically, upon their first presentation, might be impressive because of whatever, and they're not beautiful. They are really sad. They treat people horribly. They're mean to other girls, and that's not beautiful. So the story, though, is I saw a picture of myself when I was 15 while I'm in my 20s, and by then I had put on my freshman 15, and my body changed again from being a teenager. There's two changes. There's some weird stuff that goes on, and I can't explain it. But I'm like, I was fine. Like, what was I talking about? And I'm just telling you that whatever you see in the mirror every day, you are your worst critic, I promise you. And when people tell you, who you trust, that you're beautiful, it means something that don't limit that to what you see in a magazine, because you are. You are, and just all I can try to encourage you to do is not hold yourself to standards of society that say you have to look a certain way. Just focus on being your best. Be your best, develop your own style, and just be who you want to be. Because I promise you, you are going to look at pictures of yourself in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and you are going to say, what was wrong with me? Why did I think I was so fill in the blank? Promise you. And in 40 years, when you do that, remember Vivian Flowers told you so.
I was going to say, to add on what Representative Flowers has said, I hate it when the men that we serve with want to have a 7 o'clock meeting in the morning. I hate it. They roll out of bed at 6:30 or 6:45 and put their suit on, and they're there, and I had to get up at 5, you know. So there's always somewhat of a double standard. So sometimes the women of the house will push back and say, we're not coming at 7, because we know we have to get up a lot earlier than they do. Yeah. I mean, it's just society. It's the way it works sometimes.
So how do you balance your work and your family at the same time?
I'm sorry, could you start over?
How do you balance work and your family at the same time?
Well, I have in the position that I hold in my real life and not in my elected life, is I'm an attorney, and I do a lot of my work now, because the law practice has changed, that you can do a lot of your work through the computer and on the telephone. And a lot of times our meetings at the legislature don't really begin until around 10 o'clock. But my work day sometimes starts at 6:30 in the morning, and I will work on things for the real world work that I do back home before I get to the Capitol. You have to have, in my case, I have a very understanding husband who takes care of the dog and the cat. Our kids are in college, so they're not home. Though my daughter spent a lot of time yesterday when we were in session and on the House floor. She has gotten herself a part-time job, got herself paid, and went shopping. And so I was getting pictures of the cute belt she couldn't pass up at Dillard's, and did I think that was cute? And then she wanted to buy a suitcase, but she knew she couldn't call me, so she called her dad. But so I don't have kids to deal with. There are women in the House. I admire them greatly. I don't know how they do it. They have young children. And when I say young, some of them are 2 years old, maybe 5 years old, elementary school. And they have to have a really big support system, I think, because they are leaving their children and coming to Little Rock. And so it takes some balancing. I think all the time I leave, Representative Flowers commutes, I leave on Sunday night, come in, and then go home when we get out of session. So my husband was very proud of himself last night. He had gone to Walmart, bought stuff to make a cake, because he wanted to surprise me, and sent a picture of it this morning, and it did not turn out how he liked. So, you know, we do a lot of talking on the telephone, sending pictures back and forth, trying to keep things at home. I think that's one of the hardest things legislators face, is you've got your responsibilities in Little Rock, but you go home and the community wants you there. You have activities at home. And so it's nothing unusual for any of us. Sometimes have to drive back in the middle of the week to attend something, but it will be nothing unusual to get home and have events all weekend long and then come back. So you just have to learn to adjust your time, and if you're going to do it and do it right, understand that you have a responsibility to the people who elected you, to listen to them, to answer their concerns, to answer their emails, answer their phone calls, and also at the same time take care of what's going on at your own house, whether it's sweeping the floors or washing the dishes. You just learn to do those things.
Technology and delegate. Technology and delegate. You're going to have help from people at home, but also, and this is really for you, this is the only reason I'm weighing in on this one. where it takes balance, and balance doesn't mean that everything gets taken care of, you just make adjustments and it balances out to being the best scenario that you can do. People need help. And there are elected officials in your communities that if you're interested, I'm telling you, because I used to do this for about 10 years, I'm telling you, call them, send them, and if they don't answer the first time, get in touch with them, show up and say, hey, I'm interested in politics, or I'm interested in medicine, or I'm interested in sport, whatever it is. Find somebody who's doing what you're interested in doing or getting exposure to. And I promise you, old people, grown people, however, whatever you want to call us, we get really excited and impressed by young people who want to do something. And then we get even more excited at those who want to help us. So make that outreach and ask, say, hey, I'm interested in being an intern. I can give you about 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week, and I can come in once a week and do the rest on email and whatever. 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a response and have an experience. So we survive with some help, and you guys can be that help for people who you want to shadow and learn from.